And Chris Schenk, CSJ, is the founding director of Future Church. And one of the reasons why I'm so excited, hi Jane, one of the reasons why I'm so excited about her being the founding director of Future Church is that that was really an example of people coming up with an agenda, creating consensus, and coming together to create the church that they in fact are. And also, so is this book. This book is a story of that. And of course, we're at a very important historical moment when instead of complaining about what we hear and see in the country, we ought to be thinking as members of a community how to come together and join our voices around things we care about and get other people involved in that. So I'm really hoping that today we'll leave inspired to be connected in these various ways. Future Church is made up of Catholics who are from parishes, just like regular folks, like most of us. Not all of us. Some of us are lay, some are religious, but who engage in lay participation in the life of the church. She stepped back from that 12 years ago to focus on writing, and that's how I met her, was over books. And the book I want to talk about first is Crispina and Her Sisters: Women in Authority in Early Christianity. And Brian McDermott, who many of you know, Brian was writing, Brian McDermott, Jesuit, SJ, writing for America, said it would radically transform our understanding of Christian women as authority figures in early centuries. It was the first in-depth study of the archaeological evidence of women's authority in the church. It was a Catholic bestseller, and it took first place in history from the Catholic Press Association and still sells, very well. She came to Georgetown, as was said before, on a full scholarship, magna cum laude, graduate of the School of Nursing, and we've mentioned her famous class, but she entered religious life as a medical mission sister. And we have a famous also MMS sister here, Eileen Needfield, and some of us, Bill Cesato and Jane Malhotra, have written about Sister Eileen's contributions. But she served, Sister Schenk served as president of Gamma Pi Epsilon. That's a National Women's Honor Society for women at Jesuit colleges and universities. And she acquired community organizing skills in an interesting way, important for the subject of this book. She worked as an interfaith coordinator with Cesar Chavez and the Philadelphia United Farm Workers Union during the grape and lettuce boycotts. Her call was not to the foreign missions, so she left the MMS and earned a second master's degree in theology with distinction at St. Mary's Seminary and Graduate School of Theology in 1993. Then she entered the Congregation of St. Joseph, and she admired them because she'd seen them work with the poor in various social justice arenas. Her second book was To Speak the Truth in Love, a biography of Sister Teresa Kane, RSM. That came out from Orbis in 2019, and I'm going to push you all buying it today because we want to put nice wind in the sails of sisters' biographies. This took first place in the biography category from both the Association of Catholic Publishers and the Catholic Press Association. Sister Schenk was featured in 2 documentaries, Radical Grace, and also, that was an award-winning documentary, and also a 2017 documentary about this, the same stuff that the book is about, Foreclosing on Faith, America's Church Closing Crisis. And that details some of the events she's going to be sharing with you today. But now I just want to welcome her back to her old alma mater. Welcome back, Sister Christine Schenk.
Thanks, Carole. I think I'm good. Thank you. I'm going to go over here by the podium so we can wave to our friends at NCR. And I don't know how well you can see this screen. I think I am going to put these down. So thank you very, very much, especially to Carole Sargent, because if it hadn't been for her, I don't know that we would have found a publisher for this book. So that was really huge for me and huge for Sister Kate Kuenstler. We had originally planned to write this book together, but she died in 2019. I had the opportunity to interview her for over a 3-month period the summer before she died. And she was bound and determined, even though she was not feeling well, that this was going to happen. So I feel like this is a full circle fulfillment of a great woman that no one would have ever known about. And that's why we had to write this book. I want to take a moment, as I often do on my times to talk, to speak. If we could just center ourselves, and I want to invoke the Holy Spirit on us and on our church, especially at this pivotal moment in our history, both and also on our country. All right? So let's just take a moment. I'll intone it. It's like a little mantra, and you can sing back. It's real easy, not hard. So let's take a minute and be still. Holy Sacred Spirit, fall afresh on us. Holy Sacred Spirit, fall afresh on us. Together. Holy Sacred Spirit, fall afresh on us. Holy Sacred Spirit, fall afresh on us. Amen. Thank you. So, all right, I've got like probably 2 hours of material that we're going to cram into 50 minutes. It's not quite so bad. That's why I did slides to focus. So first I want to set a context, and many of you, if not everybody in this room, will be very familiar, all too familiar with the context. And that is, even though the 1983 Code of Canon Law acknowledges that as the people of God, which is us, we Catholic laity have rights and responsibilities and obligations in the church, very, very few Catholics ever exercise those rights. And this is because in most disputes with the laity, the Vatican always sided with the bishop. Over the last 20 years, the massive legal and financial fallout from failure to address clergy sex abuse and an ever worsening priest shortage has led too many U.S. bishops to regard parish property as so much disposable income, so that substantial numbers of bishops chose to shrink the number of parishes they had to fit the number of priests in their diocese and to sell their churches to help pay attorney fees. And I'm going to go now on, we are on share, right? Share screen? All right. So, between 2000 and 2023, U.S. bishops closed almost 3,000 parishes for a 15.3% decline overall. The number of priests in the meantime decreased by 11,600 for a 25% decline. So you can see what's going on. Meantime, the number of Catholics increased by 7.9 million. Since the issue, as of August 2023, a total of 32 dioceses and 3 religious orders had filed for bankruptcy protection as a direct result of clergy sex abuse lawsuits. This marked increase was due to lifting of the statute of limitations in many states. Since the issue first came to light in the 1980s, total settlements for U.S. Catholic clergy sex abuse had reached $3 billion by late 2023. The vast majority of those since the issue first came to light in 2001 or so. They're projected to reach $4 billion, and that's from the Associated Press. So where did it all start? In 2002, Cardinal Law was forced to resign in the wake of revelations of widespread clergy sex abuse of minors in the Archdiocese of Boston, which he had successfully covered up for decades. Then, in the summer of 2004, Boston Archdiocesan Administrator Richard Lennon announced he would suppress 83 parishes, which led to massive, massive resistance in Boston. Catholics in 9 parishes chose to occupy their churches for 24 hours a day rather than allow the archdiocese to close and sell them. And some of those occupations continued for 9 to 10 years. And even though there were many assurances from the archdiocese that money from the sale of churches would not be used to pay attorney fees, a Vatican High Court later affirmed that pending financial ruin necessitated the sale of Boston churches because the archdiocese was on the verge of bankruptcy. And this shone a spotlight on the reality that even the most staunchly faithful of Catholics felt completely powerless in church decision-making, even though it was their own considerable time, talent, and treasure that had built their church communities. Merging parishes, and this is part of the underpinning of this whole effort, merging parishes and closing and selling their churches is not an answer. And I'll show you a 2003 national study from the Conference of Pastoral Planning and Council Development found that 40% of merged parishes actually lost parishioners, whereas parishes kept open with lay parish directors were more likely actually to increase parishioners. And then a 2008 Emerging Models of Pastoral Leadership project identified all the variety of parish organization models that could work to meet the situation that we're in with increasing Catholics, fewer priests, etc. One, of course, is the traditional priest-pastor-centered parish. The other is a collaborative pastoral teams, parish life coordinators with a regular presence, clustered and merged parishes. I'm not going through them all, but there are many other options, all approved under canon law. So, well, what were we going to do when we've got this massive closing and merging of parishes? And enter Sister Kate Kuenstler. Between 2006 and 2011, Kate assisted hundreds of parishioners in lodging at least 75 canonical appeals opposing the closure of their vibrant, solvent parishes. And I'm saying at least because this is the data we were able to collect at Future Church. There were many others that we may not have known about, but this is what we knew. Every single one of those recourses was denied, first by the diocesan bishop and later by the Vatican's Congregation for the Clergy. Now it's called the Dicastery for the Clergy, which is basically the first court of appeals in Rome. But inexplicably, I said a word, the tide turned in early 2011 when, thanks to Kate's canonical expertise and a really incredibly dynamic pastor, Catholics in the Diocese of Camden, Syracuse, Allentown, Springfield, and Buffalo suddenly began to win their appeals. These were soon followed by victories in Cleveland, New York, the Archdiocese of New York, Indianapolis, Miami, Houston, and many others. Sister Kate forged a new path in canon law, catalyzing a change in Vatican procedures around mergers and closings, and no longer would Rome rubber stamp whatever any given bishop wanted. Today, Catholics are able to exercise appropriate decision-making in preserving their parish homes. But equally important to this story, and I can't emphasize this enough, is the witness of many thousands, literally, of parishioners and a few good priests who bravely stood in the breach and fought for the scores of parish and church communities that remain open to this day because of their courageous efforts. So, who is Kate Kuenstler? Our shero here. Here she is at ages 2, 7, and in high school. She was born in a really teeny tiny town called Wendelin, Illinois. Her family, her parents were very much involved in their teeny tiny local parish, Holy Cross Parish, which is still there today in Wendelin. It was a very close-knit community, beautifully her family farms is where she grew up. She never wanted to stay. So anyway, that's history. But her earliest explicit memories of God are interwoven with the beauty of her family's farm. She noticed all the green around, she said, the soybeans and corn. And by then I had learned this story about creation and I knew God had created all this. It became like a three-dimensional reality, she said, that God was real, this was part of God's plan, and I was part of it too. Her sister Agnes once told her, her older sister, Kate, you wanted to be a sister from the very day you were born. And so after completing 8th grade at the tiny Wendland School, which was taught by the Poor Handmaids of Jesus Christ, Kate chose to travel 250 miles away to attend their Ancilla Domini High School. And from there, she chose to enter the Poor Handmaids. Quote, "It just seemed like that was a good next step. I thought about it, I felt at home with the Poor Handmaids, and it seemed this is where God wanted me to be, and I was happy." She gained a master's in theology and began working in adult education, which she absolutely loved, in Belleville, Illinois. A financial crisis closed the diocesan education office, whereupon Kate developed a standalone adult catechist formation program that trained parish directors of religious education and parish catechists. It was not dependent on diocesan finances. And this model became so successful that the Springfield, Illinois diocese also adopted it. And eventually, every parishioner in the southern half of Illinois would benefit from her creativity. She realized that this probably 10 to 15 years experience working with rural parishes with an empowered laity. Basically, she says, my background prepared me for my work with parish closings and church closings. There was this whole thing about this is a quote from her, about the rights of laity and canon law, realizing that the laity have a voice and they have been stifled. It's been so stifled and scared off by the hierarchy, she says. And so my goal was to empower the laity to know they had a right to a voice, they had a voice, and to help them learn how to use it. Much to her, at first dismay and then surprise, her community asked her to go to Rome and study canon law, which she did at the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, the Angelicum. While she was there, she studied Book 2 in the 1983 Code and discovered a listing of the rights of laity that had emerged from the Second Vatican Council. And this is a quote. "I remember sitting in the classroom in Rome and I opened the canon law book and I'm thinking, do they know what they wrote? Did they really mean what I'm reading here? I couldn't believe it, and I couldn't wait to come back and tell everyone all about it." And that's exactly what she did. She came back to the United States, ended up in another position in the marriage tribunal in the Diocese of Belleville. And there, which was undergoing a lot of fallout from clergy sex abuse, it was one of the early dioceses that dealt with it. And as you may remember, your own Archbishop, Cardinal Wilton Gregory, was the bishop there and handled it very responsibly. He also was willing to meet with this upstart church reform renewal group called FOSSIL, the Fellowship of Southern Illinois Laity. And Mina Walterine was one of the leaders of the group, and they would ask different things, and Gregory or whoever he had designated to meet with them kept saying, oh no, you can't do that, it's in canon law. Oh no, you can't do that, it's in canon law, whatever. And so finally Lena said, well, would someone come and give us a talk on canon law? So the first guy she asked, he said, oh yeah, but then he didn't want to do it. So what he did is he got Kate, and Kate goes, well, yeah, I'll do it. Well, she went, and as Lena says, there were 150 people there, and Kate was incredible. She began her presentation by saying, canon law is your friend, And so she did this whole gig on the rights of the laity for the Belleville folks. As it happened, Lena was on the board of the National Call to Action group, which many of you probably recall and remember. And so before you knew it, Kate was on the road giving her gig on the rights of laity in the church. And so by 2009, she had given a total of 31 presentations in 10 states. Most venues were filled to capacity, attracting between 100 and 300 Catholics who were amazed to discover they had rights in the church. And get a load of this, those rights were protected by canon law. Meanwhile, I should talk a little bit about the Future Church Board of Directors, which Carole gave a nice presentation. But the organization I co-founded with Father Louis Trivison had been deeply rooted in parish reality since its founding in 1990, when, in response to a steadily worsening priest shortage, 28 Cleveland parishes and religious communities signed a statement saying that access to the Mass is more central to Catholic identity than the gender or marital status of the priest. Because we could see, and our diocesan paper was actually publishing the projections about the priest shortage. So when we watched what was happening in Boston, by this time we had a board and we were like a real organization, we realized that if the Archdiocese of Boston succeeded, it was just a matter of time till every other diocese in the country would follow the same model, because closing parishes and selling their churches solved two problems for the bishops. One, they didn't have enough priests to staff the parishes they had. Two, they didn't have enough money to pay for clergy sex abuse bills. And so, seeing the handwriting on the wall, we developed this Save Our Parish community initiative to provide educational and organizing resources to faith communities that were discerning an appropriate response to diocesan decisions to close or merge their vibrant, solvent, and apostolically effective parish. I just want to give a shout out here to Father Jim Corden. His 1997 book, The Parish and Catholic Tradition, was a model for our very first crisis kit canon law 101 about parishes, which is a theoretical guidebook outlining ways to claim and vindicate parish rights using this administrative recourse procedure. But no one had actually done it like in real time until Kate came along. So when she began her work in 2006, no one had ever tried to figure out how we could actually make these rights real. You know, you really don't have a right until you claim it. And so, so Kate, you know, certainly she forged a new path in that, and it was a really important kind of moment of, I think I'm losing my track here for a minute, because one good thing to help you understand is at the beginning, when Kate first started, all the canons and all the rules about what you should do and not do, you couldn't find them. They were all over the canon law. So there was no one place that said, oh, this is what happened, this is what you do. So she had to piece together how to proceed. And so I want to now take a moment and talk about those faith communities that she helped win their courses in canon law, how she changed the trajectory. And the first one here is St. Mary Church in the Diocese of Syracuse. It's the only Catholic church in Jamesville, which is a small hamlet of about 10,000 people. It had 535 registered families who were worshiping. Their community was growing, not shrinking. It had over 1,000 people were expected to move into the area. They had a food bank, support for a Somalia family, was financially stable, welcome, with assets of over $500,000. It had no debt. It annually met its fundraising obligations, and now their bishop wanted to merge this vital, vibrant, solvent, apostolically effective, tight-knit parish with another parish called Holy Cross in a nearby town in DeWitt, which, by the way, had an outstanding building loan of over $1 million, with another $400,000 to $500,000 in debt tied up in litigation over stained glass windows, of which the accruing monthly interest fees were about $6,500. And so this is a key point. The way I bring this out is because this is what we saw again and again, that Kate saw again and again. Vibrant, apostolically effective, financially stable parish with money in the bank would be merged with a parish that was deeply in debt. And once it happened, all those assets went to pay off the debt of the deeply in debt parish. And we saw that just way too many times. But enter a great university professor, Colleen Latreille from nearby Le Moyne College, who had the new pastor of the merged entity. It told her that St. Mary's did not have the right to appeal. He repeatedly stated out public there was no appeal process, But wouldn't you know, Kate had just given this presentation in Syracuse about the rights of Catholics in the church, and she read about it in her diocesan paper. And she realized we do have a right to appeal. So the next thing you know, she contacts Kate, and this was Kate's very first recourse to Rome. It was the first administrative recourse, first with the Congregation for Clergy. And even though, and of course at the time, great pundits like the incredibly wonderful Tom Rees, even though he was wrong on this one, he said, bishops aren't interested in arguments like this is a wonderful parish. They're not going to go get into second guessing pastoral decisions about local bishops. And he was pretty much saying how it was at the time. However, don't you know, the appeal didn't go anywhere at the Congregation of Clergy. It went to the Apostolic Signatura, which is essentially the highest court in the church. And in December 2010, it was the first parishional appeal to be accepted and granted a full hearing at the Signatura. And in May 21st, 2011, St. Mary Jamesville Catholics were the first parishional appeal. And just several months later, they received a precedent-setting decision when the Apostolic Signatura ruled that their church must remain open. So what did we learn? One, it's possible to appeal to the church's highest court and win. Two, it may not be possible to reverse a merger, but it is possible to preserve your church. And so right after that, suddenly we've got all these Congregation of Clergy issuing similar partial victories to 13 churches in Allentown, Springfield, and Buffalo. In each case, Rome upheld the bishop's ability to suppress the parish, but ruled their churches must remain open as worship sites. Something big had occurred at the Vatican, because remember, all the appeals from 2006 to 2011 went nowhere. So something significant occurred, no one knew what, or what was behind it. Enter, this is what was behind it, Camden St. Vincent Pallotti Parish, now St. Joseph the Worker. And this parish and its pastor engaged in a multi-year struggle to save the parish and its church from destruction, and their victory became the linchpin upon which these succeeding appeals turned. And just to give you a little bit of backstory, in the fall of 2006, the Camden Diocese launched a parish planning process called Gathering God's Gifts with the goal of revitalizing parish life. 4 months later, Bishop Galante announced a massive reconfiguring of parishes, Camden parishes, which would eventually decrease the number of parishes from 124 to 66, half. It soon became apparent, and again, this is one of the things we saw often, the new function of the parish planning team was to reconfigure parishes rather than to plan pastoral activity. So you went from thinking you're going to revitalize your own parish to being joined with 3 or 4 other parishes, and now you have to decide which 2 you're going to vote off the island, so to speak. I got that from the Boston people. So parish, and they were being told, again, a decline of 50% of available priests was projected for 2015 compared to the 2006 numbers. And so fewer than 85 active priests would be available in 2015 to serve the diocese's 500,000 Catholics. And this made me crazy because the bishops would repeat this again and again. And the analogy I have is, okay, you've got 20 Starbucks franchises on the east side of Washington, D.C. Only 10 of them, it's like closing them all because we don't have enough red-haired baristas to serve. You don't close down the whole enterprise. So, and that key point was reiterated in Cleveland about changing everything in midstream. A little bit about the parish itself. It was a largely blue-collar Catholic parish formed in 1963. A dynamic new pastor, Monsignor Lou Marucci, arrived and brought about what parishioners called a rebirth. Marucci got around in a motorized wheelchair after being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 1987, just 6 months after being ordained, which he said this deepened his relationship with God. He was a musician, he loved people, The vibrant community attracted 3,000 parishioners from 34 zip codes in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. It offered 37 active parish ministries. The parish paid all its bills and regularly led the diocese in support of the bishop's annual appeal. And just Marucci, they had raised $1 million to add a new addition to the St. Vincent Pallotti campus, which was a rectory, memorial hall, and parish offices with naming rights from donors. 54 of the 56 deanery delegates voted that St. Vincent Pallotti would be the parish seat, merging the three parishes in their cluster. And it was selected because of its spaciousness, ample parking, new buildings, vibrant ministries, disability access. 4 months later, just 4 months later, Bishop Galante ignored the deanery recommendation and ordered Pallotti to merge with St. Aloysius, even though older buildings, scarce parking, no handicap access. Whereupon Marucci contacted Sister Kate. And the dynamic duo hammered out what became a paradigm-shifting appeal. Well, what was actually going on? The deal was the diocese wanted St. Vincent Pallotti land because the parish sat on a 35-acre lot worth $27.2 million. And so the closure and the sale, which made it the most valuable of all the churches. If the closure and sale went through, it would be in violation of both canon law and the civil laws of New Jersey, because Marucci, who, by the way, had been headed the fundraising office in Camden and raised boatloads of money, he was very conscientious about what it means to be a fundraiser. And here he had this $1 million facility that had naming rights with donations from everywhere that had just been dedicated 4 months before Galante said, oh, we're going to close your whole place down. So it was violating donor intent. So Marucci asked the diocesan chancellor, well, can I appeal this? And he was told, you can't appeal it because there's no administrative act, which is what you need. So in Camden, Bishop Galante, who, by the way, was a canon lawyer and had worked in Rome, he had devised a pretty slick workaround to counter any attempts to resist what he was putting out. And he announced he would not issue the formal decrees to merge the parishes until after they were completed, which could easily take 2 years or more. Since canon law requires a canonical recourse has to begin within 10 days of the bishop issuing a formal decree, without a decree, no recourse could theoretically be filed. And his plan denied parishioners their rights to appeal and seek recourse in Rome. But thankfully, Kate and Marucci found a way to argue that the merger manual, which the diocese had put out, was essentially an administrative act. Thankfully, the dicastery for the clergy agreed with them and allowed the appeal to go forward. It did go forward to the Apostolic Signatura, the High Court, where it was denied at the threshold. It's a legal term, because they didn't have a decree. And of course, they couldn't have a decree because the bishop refused to issue one, yada, yada. But the signature also said that this is without prejudice. The decision is without prejudice to the possibility of your having recourse against the decision of the Bishop of Camden if and when the decree is issued. Now, Galante was smart enough to know that if the decree happened, he was going to lose. And so he reversed himself. He didn't take it anymore. He just said, okay, St. Vincent Pallotti can stay open. In the meantime, Sister Kate had also written to, of all people, Cardinal Raymond Burke, who at the time was the prefect of the Signatura, advising him, you don't want to get involved in this. There's a lot of lawyers on this appeal team. You're going to lose because of restricted gifts. This won't bode well in the public forum. So this was again a watershed sort of out of the media, which was suddenly why we're getting all those other appeals that we're winning. So looking back nearly a decade later, Kate described her intervention with Cardinal Burke as a watershed, and she marveled, "I got Burke on my side," which is unheard of. He would deny it today. And that involvement saved this church, this parish. All the while, I'm shivering in my boots and thinking, oh my God, what did I just do? So anyway, so what did we learn about St. Vincent Pallotti? One is that the Vatican will uphold the right of parishioners to obtain the decree or the administrative act so they can pursue recourse. So the bishop's workaround failed. 2, donor intent must be respected. Now I want to turn to the Cleveland Diocese, and I'll really try to limit myself because this is my home diocese and I feel pretty passionate about it even today. In a March 2012 landmark ruling for the first time, a bishop, Richard Lennon, who by the way was transferred to Cleveland from Boston, that's a whole story all by itself, he was ordered to reopen 12 parishes and their churches that he had closed 3 years earlier. And this was the first time that we won on both winning the merger of the parish and the church. And so it was a pretty big thing. Just a little bit of backstory. The Cleveland situation was far different than Boston. For one thing, the diocese was much better shape financially. It increased revenue by 6.4 to 269 million in 2006. Catholics gave a record 106.1 million that year, even after all the impact of clergy sex abuse was felt. So people were not on the ropes financially. 2, the previous bishop had valued parishes and their places and how important they were in low-income neighborhoods. He did everything he possibly could to keep them open. Unfortunately, when Richard Lennon announced his plan to close 52 parishes, every single one of them was either in an inner city or an inner ring suburb of parishes. But Pilla's philosophy, which was what we sort of all came up with in Cleveland, was to keep Catholic parishes and schools going in urban regions for as long as possible. He prioritized mission over money. Len Calabrese, who worked with him, calls it more than one conversation. Pilla would say, why would you want to close parishes? They're the presence of the church in a community, and they're serving people in all kinds of ways. So he did everything he could financially to support struggling parishes. He found creative strategies to keep communities together. We had 13 parish life coordinators, pastoral teams, very empowered laity in church decision-making under Bishop Pilla. He had inaugurated a vibrant parish life initiative, but it was around clustering and sharing staff. It wasn't, some probably would have closed, but it was a very small number. And he basically says, I don't believe that building vibrant parish life can be legislated. It must involve initiative at the local community level and be embraced willingly with a heart by those most affected. So then Richard Lennon arrives from Boston, which was reeling from all the financial effects from clergy sex abuse. Richard Lennon viewed parishes as corporations, not as communities of faith. And I think this is one of the biggest threads through all of this. Too many bishops are looking at their parishes like Starbucks franchises rather than what they are, the body of Christ. And so Pastor Bob Begin from St. Coleman says, quote, he evidently read a book on franchise management. He makes his decisions as if parishes are franchises. If there's enough room in one church for all to worship, why have more than one? A particular mission, ethnicity, none of these means anything if the customer base can be satisfied. So this was this mentality. He did not value cultural differences, couldn't figure out why you couldn't, absolutely merge parishes from a primarily Latino background with an African American background. He didn't value creative strategies. He got rid of all the pastoral teams and parish coordinators. And no lay empowerment. And Rick Kravenka, who was running the diocesan pastoral planning office, great guy. And he had been doing it for 20 years, and he knew where everything was in every parish. Honest to God, this guy was phenomenal. He heard disturbing feedback from parish leaders, and I quote, someone would say, Bishop, welcome to our parish. And Bishop Lennon would say, "It's not your parish, it's my parish." Quote. And, said Rick, in his typically understated way, "That kind of thinking is deeply problematic." I thought, no kidding, Rick. So once again, there was a derailing of the vibrant parish. We went from clustering parishes to voting people off the island. Future Church did try to meet with Bishop. We did meet with him, with Father Lou, telling him about 40% of merged parishes lose parishioners. It didn't go well, but we tried. He did close 52 parishes, and his decision was met with a huge degree of outrage and dismay. Rocco Palma, some of you may know, who's a sort of a pundit online, he said on March 7th, 2012, after what he called it the most ferocious and bitter pastoral planning face-off of the stateside church has seen in the last quarter of a century. And this is because this bishop insisted on going to all the closing masses, even though people were hugely upset. He ended up wearing bulletproof vests. We had security people at these closing masses. So it was just ugly. And people would confront him. I don't think anybody would have done any violence, but just to give you an idea of the state in which this formerly unified diocese had come to. Just a thing about the Black community when he closed St. Cecilia, Epiphany, and St. Adalbert. Actually, it's two parishes, St. Cecilia, Epiphany were sort of one. It left 19 square miles without any Catholic presence in predominantly Black Cleveland neighborhoods, stretching from Shaker Heights in the east to downtown Cleveland. And Pastor Dan began from St. Cecilia's. For many Black Catholics, he said, the church is their whole life. Now there's nothing convenient for them to get there. A lot just aren't going to go to Mass. And I want to talk just a moment about historic St. Peter, because that's this image right here. Because this was really an outrage. It was an excellent Catholic parish. A Lilly-endowed study called it, was named it an excellent Catholic parish. Paul Wilkes' book named its outstanding liturgy, and Paul Philibert publicly praised the liturgical excellence of Cleveland St. Peter in an article in Worship Magazine. Even though the average Sunday Mass attendance in Cleveland was 28%, a full 64% of St. Peter's 700 parishioners hailed from 5 of the 8 counties comprising the diocese, attended every Sunday at this historic church in inner city Cleveland. Whoops, I don't want to get ahead there. They supported Marion Sterling Public School, educating 550 pre-kindergartners. They raised thousands of dollars for special education projects. They did reading programs, day-long tutoring. The summer Bishop Lennon closed the church, the congregation had raised $250,000 to have a playground and learning garden built in the school. It was financially robust. It had raised $2 million to restore the church. And in 2008, the bishop refused a parishioner's offer of an additional $2 million earmarked in part for back due assessments, which Pilla had put on hold until the restoration was completed. And $1 million was dedicated to its outreach ministries, but Lennon closed it anyway. So just to give you a picture, this is not parishes on their last legs that you just have to finally face it, These are vital, vibrant, doing important things for poor people. So now, thankfully, Future Church, because we had seen what happened in Boston, we had enough time to get ready. We began a diocesan-wide organizing thing with canonical resources developed by Sister Kate, so people could download them from our website. And then we created an email list, so when all this hit in Cleveland, we had a pathway. And then over 20 parishes looked at it. 15 actually ended up appealing. 2 were reversed immediately by Bishop Lennon. And the other 13 were eventually reversed 3 years later. So, yada, On Wednesday, March 7th, 2012, Associated Press reported the Vatican had upheld the 13 Cleveland appeals on both procedural and substantive grounds. This cartoon photo appeared in the Cleveland Plain Dealer. There was great rejoicing because, again, as I said earlier, it was a landmark ruling because up until this time, Vatican officials had given split decisions. And so what did we learn? One, a coordinated diocesan-wide pushback can be effective. Two, it is possible to keep both your parish and your church intact because the Vatican upheld the Cleveland appeals. And three, and this is probably the most important piece for our purposes, Sister Kate wrote a commentary. I should have said at the beginning, Sister Kate worked underground until 2012. She did not want anybody to know that she was the canonical brains behind all of these appeals, mostly because she did not want bishops going after her PHJC superiors, telling them to tell her to stop doing what she was doing. Now, her superiors, who are wonderful women, told me, oh no, we wouldn't have done that. And I don't think they would have. But Kate, why do the hassle? You know, you don't need this. So when she did this great, really, victory in Cleveland, it was so substantive from a canon law point of view, she decided I needed to write a commentary. And because it was, I think, one of the first times we got a clearer idea of what the thinking of Rome was. And this was the very first public explanation of Rome's changing rules about parish mergers and closings. And Kate wrote, both the Congregation for Clergy and the Apostolic Signatura now make a clear distinction between the legitimate reasons to merge parishes and legitimate reasons to close a church. She clarified that a shortage of priests, diocesan financial challenges, and demographic issues are not sufficient reason to close churches. And I just want to develop this because this was the first public thing. In 2013, a year later, Vatican procedures said exactly what you said. Lack of clergy, demographic decline, or grave financial state don't constitute a grave cause to deconsecrate and sell a church. In 2020, the Vatican instruction said these three criteria also apply to parish mergers and modifications, which that was a huge thing. And yet, all three of these reasons are still being cited often by bishops who are closing parishes and churches today. So just to go through this a bit, the official procedures require distinct canonical, there are two reasons for distinct processes for modifying a parish or closing a church or selling or alienating a church property, which basically goes with the closing the church. The bishop must consult with the diocesan presbyteral council. He has to issue two separate decrees, and this is why Lennon lost, because he only issued one, and it was a cookie-cutter decree for all 52 parishes. One for modifying a parish and one for closing a church. And each decree must list the just cause for modifying a parish or grave cause for closing a church. You need bigger reasons for closing a church. Anyway, so no more cookie-cutter decrees. This is the upshot. Because of this great victory, Kate received the Louis J. Trivison Award from Future Church on September 30th. It was a very joyous night. And she, after her commentary, many other dioceses wrote. Anyway, I just want to say what she wrote, what she said that night. She said, with this recognition, you also recognize the laity in the church today who use their voice, which was affirmed 50 years ago at the Second Vatican Council and envisioned later in the Code of Canon Law. And then she quoted Canon 212. The Christian faithful have the right, and even at times the duty, to manifest to the sacred pastors their opinion on matters which pertain to the good of the church. So, after ending her anonymity with this commentary, she was swamped with new clients, and her commentary began to significantly impact diocesan policy elsewhere, leading to more successful appeals in Kansas City, Grand Rapids, Miami, Indianapolis, and Houston. The canonical documents that she prepared for Cleveland, then we called it the Canonical Appeals for Dummies, but now it's called the Canonical Resource Project, process, we left out the dummies, but we were trying to make a sense. Anyway, and the commentary were downloaded by literally hundreds of parishioners in other U.S. dioceses, as well as England, Ireland, Australia, and Canada. And we tracked all this from the Future Church website because it was the hub where people downloaded and then would respond. I just do a quick thing about the Archdiocese of New York because that started in 2015. Again, he tried and failed to withhold the decrees from the parishioners. Kate had to go to Rome to make them release the decrees, even though, because you have this 10 days, but if you don't have the decree, you can't do the recourse. He also wrote cookie cutter decrees with boilerplate language. And of the 42 archdiocesan churches he had planned to close, Kate's expertise helped courageous New York Catholics preserve 11 of them for regular worship. And this was a time where she was really grateful. She wrote, "I believe this is a seminal time in the U.S. Church. I'm hopeful we can stop the floodgates that are decimating the faith life of the laity." She says, "I argued the cases in a new way. I have influenced the development of jurisprudence for the first time." I'm going to get emotional now. "Someday this new jurisprudence may very well become part of the next revision of canon law. But for the first time since 2005, I have had validation from Rome, and it feels good." So, yeah. And there's more to that story I'll tell you in just a minute. But I just want to this is going to make you dizzy looking at it. But basically, we did try to track as many appeals as we could at Future Church. We found that, of the, there are two levels: the diocesan appeal, where the bishop can reverse it, and Kate won 49% of those. The other half were really cardinal. Who's the guy in Boston? Why am I blanking? No, his successor, O'Malley. He was much more pastoral, and so he reversed the other ones. He reversed. And then of the successful Rome appeals, Kate won 65%, and it was very emergent. So between 2019 and 2024, and this is now we're coming to the end, believe it or not. We tracked then. Once this book was done, I wanted to see, well, did she make any difference? Is anybody paying any attention now? And so I asked the question, have archdiocesan parish reconfiguration processes and decrees shown a greater respect for the canonical rights of parishes and of the laity? And I looked at 5 dioceses and archdioceses that had widespread reconfigurations going on. And they were Chicago, St. Louis, Cincinnati, Joliet, and Columbus. So once promulgated, is the decree readily available to anyone seeking recourse? And yes, Chicago, St. Louis, readily available, but you had to do a big search in Cincinnati and Joliet. So 4 of the 5, actually all 5, it was available, and with varying difficulty of accessing it. Do the decrees provide individualized data, sacramental, attendance for each parish, financial, identifying a just cause for parish merger or a grave cause for church closure? In other words, is this a cookie cutter decree that the bishop just entered massively for everybody, or is it really about what's going on in each parish? In Chicago, Cincinnati, and St. Louis, yes. In part, Joliet, it didn't have financial, and no individualized data, Columbus. Does the website or decree process include education about canon law and parish or church closures? Yes, it's explicit in Cincinnati and St. Louis. I don't know why this is somewhat. Chicago website explains it. And Joliet says education happened during parish consultation, but Columbus did not. Do the decrees name a right to seek canonical recourse within an appropriate time frame? Yes, with data supplied, St. Louis. Yes, within 10 useful days, Chicago, Cincinnati, and Joliet. No, poor Columbus isn't doing well. Anyway, we have to talk to them. And this is a big one because I'll tell you something's just changed with this now for the good. When the parishioners seek, canon law says if you seek recourse, your parish and church should stay open until that's decided. Bishops were not doing them. They were just closing down. Too bad. You want to appeal? Okay. So we asked, do they suspend the effects of the decree allowing the parish to remain open? Well, congratulations to Archbishop Rosansky in St. Louis, because he did. The ones who notified through the diocesan process, he let them stay open until the decisions were made. And a couple of them, they won those mergers, but not so in these other three. But here's the cool thing. Buffalo, 14 parishes did recourse, and the dicastery for the clergy told the Bishop of Buffalo he could not close those parishes until the recourse had run its course. And that's a first. We've never had Rome say to a bishop, you have to keep these places open until we find out what is happening with the appeal. Okay, so I want to talk now a minute, just briefly, about Kate's final hours and days. This is sort of the personal side of her story. She spent a huge amount of time consoling literally hundreds of people when their canonical recourses were denied. And I'm going to quote from her. When we get negative decisions from the Vatican, she says, which are more likely than not to take place, I am then on the phone with these people that I have worked for sometimes a year. I sometimes spend 2 to 3 hours with them on the phone, crying together with what happened, mourning the fact that it's over, going through this pain. I don't let them hang up until we come to some sort of peace. They can't accept it, and they shouldn't. But just a peacefulness, a calmness comes. The original agony is not there. So after spending hours consoling despondent Catholics, Kate realized, quote, this is what the bishop should be doing. I'm taking the place of this bishop. Not that I claim that. I just wonder why these men are bishops if they cannot walk with the pain that they themselves have created for the people. Eventually, she found great meaning in sharing the wounds of the people she served. Quote, I find that as important as it is to do what I do as a canon lawyer, as a Christian, as a woman of faith, this walking with the people and their pain is the most important thing that I do. So, even though I had worked with her for over 10 years, I had no notion of the closely guarded personal struggle Kate was enduring in fidelity to her mission. Well, yeah, she's told me, I actually spent 7 years in a dark night of the soul. Yet, her canonical work, even though she continued her canonical work, even though she had no effective attitude or energy, and became more and more seriously depressed, she says. She told me she was like she was walking around a Quasimodo on her back. She felt the whole time. But Kate's love for her foundress, how she got out of it, was a great love for her foundress, Mother Catherine Casper, who, by the way, grew up in a teeny tiny hamlet in Germany, much like the place Kate grew up. So she realized she needed to set aside her ego, as her foundress advised. Quote, what was important were the people from the parishes who were doing this for the right reasons. I realized I had to start following what my foundress had said about not following my ego and always asking, is this the will of God? And that's where I redirected a lot of my energy. Am I doing the will of God? But in the end, she said, I had to stay very faithful to the mission. I had to stay faithful to the will of God and to what the needs of the people were, not my needs. And this was a real learning experience for me. Sister Kate's death in October 2019 left many Catholic activists like me feeling bereft, yet she herself was at peace. She did not fear death, although she fought hard to live. Perhaps my role was to begin this work on the behalf of the laity, she told me, expressing the conviction that it was now far enough along for others to follow. And I will say, indeed it is. There are now canon lawyers from the St. Joseph Foundation, Robert Flummerfelt, who are handling all the appeals and recourses in all those dioceses that I name. Every single one of them has a network of lay people working to preserve their parishes. So, just to bring this to a close, Sister Kate Kuenstler's unwavering love for parish communities paved the way for lay Catholics, for the first time, I believe, to exercise leverage and church decisions that affected them directly. Her passion for empowering the laity helped prepare the way for synodality to become a Catholic reality, I think, at the 2021-24 Synod on Synodality. Because of her faith in God and in the people of God, the arc of Catholic history may at last be bending toward justice. Amen. Thank you. It's so good to see you. Thank you. All right, over to you guys.
Well, you choked up, and so did half the room.
Okay.
Hi.
Well,
Well, as we go to Q&A, I'm going to ask you for a very important favor. Would you please state your first name and your last name and give me just a short bit of context, because we have such interesting people in the room. It's going to be interesting for the live streamers to know who's here. And I'm going to ask this of the live streamers as well. Would you please, when you get a chance to ask a question, give us your first name and last name. And we're going to take the first one who comes either on the live stream or in the room. And so you watch there, I watch here, and whoever's hand goes up first will start.
I have
Okay.
one that
Yeah.
was actually, can I show your?
Oh, that's right. I'm supposed to give it to you. There you go.
Great. We had one question that was sent in previously. We actually had several questions that were sent in previously, but most, I think, Sister Chris answered in that. But one question says, what are the best 3 steps that current parishioners should be taking if they're facing closings in the near future?
yeah, I think the first step is to download resources from Future Church Save Our Parish Community website, just so you know the lay of the land. And I just want to say, and I didn't have the chance to develop it so much, we don't presume that everybody who downloads resources is appropriate for pursuing an appeal. So the first thing is to do a discernment. Is your parish solvent? Are you having active ministries? Is this a vital enterprise, or is it pretty much going down on its last legs financially? So, and there may be reasons to continue even then. I mean, think of all the places that started with nothing and then things changed. But the resource walks you through, what do we do? How can we do this? It also walks you through what your rights and responsibilities are. And so I think that would be the first thing. I think that, especially if you're an activist kind of person in your parish, the other one would be to convene the parish leadership, and don't presume that your bishop has it out for you. Sometimes bishops, they get a lot of information, they've got a lot on their plate, they may not have all the data. And so I think it would be really important with your pastoral leadership to try to connect with the bishop ahead of time. One of the things I didn't have time to say, but in St. Louis, a gentleman there, Joe Young, reached out to us, and he thought that Archbishop Rosansky was trying to close way too many parishes, something like 153 or something. And he got information from what had happened in Boston, where Cardinal O'Malley is doing everything in his power to make things better there. So he connected people from the chancery in St. Louis with people in Boston, and they ended up, I don't know, but cutting by half the number of parishes that they thought would have to close. So I think it's important to have that personal relationship with your pastoral leadership. And of course, then the third thing is always to sustain and gather together with your parish community within a prayerful way. Because if the decision, the first step is always to appeal with the bishop, and he has 30 days to respond. And then if he doesn't respond, you use that 30 days for developing your case, next case to Rome. And the resources walk you through that. So. And we will respond to you. That's why I do keep a hand in there, so we send you whatever we know now about what's happening. I will say just one cool thing, that March 30th came from Boston, or not Boston, the Archdiocese of New York. Immaculate Conception's merger was revoked by Rome because the information wasn't correct. I mean, the diocese was saying that they didn't there was a decline in the number of people coming to church. And in fact, there was like a 26 or 30% increase. It was saying, well, there weren't enough priests, but as we have seen, that's not a good reason. And Parish already had a plan for that. And it was really the most comprehensive response I have seen from the Congregation for Clergy, just dealing with mergers and what's a just cause and what is not. And it tells me right there, that is a huge difference from, what was happening in 2006. And so I found it very encouraging, that and the Buffalo mergers. Frank. Oh.
Go and speak right into it.
Okay. Sister Chris, that was terrific.
Oh, thank you. High
and-
praise.
Just amazing. Yeah. My question has to do with the synodality that we're going through now. And despite what Sister Kate said about the friendliness of canon law, we know through that synod consultation that was an issue about lay participation, lay rights. Pastoral councils are optional now, but they seem to be, they're going to be mandatory in the future. So out of that synod that just took place, one of the areas, there were 10 or 12 areas or so, that where they have formed task forces, and one of them is in canon law. So what input will future church or someone have to that group that's rewriting canon law at the present time? Because these are just wonderful case studies in what has happened to document the need to build into that law even more strengths than it has. So
Thanks. And anybody knows anybody I can send a book to, I'll do that. I will say that, like many of the groups around this table, Future Church did a very comprehensive listening thing for every different segment of the synod to give that input. But I don't know. I mean, we need to find out who the canon lawyers are. And, there were a whole array, as I understand it, Frank, and maybe you tracked it more closely, or other people in the room speak up. But there were an array of things that needed canonical adjustments. I mean, one of them being evaluating your bishop, or evaluating your pastor. I mean, those are new things, new ideas that have not been on the screen. I honestly think I took such great heart from this March 30th thing from clergy that tells me, oh my gosh, already they're paying attention. They're doing at least what it says in canon law now. But I think we need to know who are the mover and shaker people, or I don't like that word maybe, but who are the people working on this and how do we connect with them? And I don't know how to do that, but I'm sure we'll try to figure it out. I don't know. I think that was one of the places, even though people were like, oh, they won't do women deacons and it's a task force, and it's been a task force for the last 400 years. But the thing I took most heart from was the canon law stuff, because that tells me they're getting serious about how do we integrate and empower lay decision-making at every level. And that was clearly part of Francis's vision. And so to me, that's what I'm going to be watching. And sort of the ongoing implementation of the synod process in the US, we'll see how that goes and in our own diocese. And I would just encourage you to be involved with that to the extent that you can. Is that Carrie Danner?
It is.
I see people from my church reform past. Oh, cool.
We have a lot of luminaries in the room. I did want to notice Dean Roberta Waite, because she's from the School of Nursing.
Yes,
And
Dean Waite.
That's a nice
And my classmates,
connection. Yeah.
Meg
Mhm.
and Julie and Leslie from the great class of 1968. So,
Before we go to the next question from the room, though, I want to just make sure we don't have one from our live streamers. Okay, then.
Okay, thank you, Carole. Paul Manuel, I teach in the government department at Georgetown and also at McCourt School. I write on religion and politics and social welfare. Thank you for an amazing presentation. Encouraging, extraordinary. But you said something that hadn't occurred to me before and got me thinking about the way that the bishops, who are, how do I put this? Distinctly lacking in imagination, one-dimensional in their thought, and you wonder about the whole training for them. That's a whole nother story.
Mhm.
But let's stick for a minute with the imagery of the franchises, the Starbucks franchise, just for fun.
Mhm.
Of course, it's the body of Christ, and to live reality in these parishes and how people express their faith and help each other and do all that. So it's essential. But let's just stick with it for a minute. So if I'm running a Starbucks and I'm a CEO, and I find that my Starbucks is not performing, a coffee shop isn't performing well, I could just close it, or I could do a customer survey. I could find out why people aren't coming. I could find out what we could do to change the bottom line. I could make it more solvent. And it feels to me as if they went one way and they just very narrow data sets they were looking at. They weren't looking at other data sets.
Yeah.
So my question now that we're really talking about a bottom up, sort of this,
Right.
which is amazing. Is there any indication that people are more involved in these parishes and that the financial situation looks better now that they've been empowered in these success stories?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, St. Vincent de Paul is now St. Joseph the Worker, and it's still thriving. St. Mary, Jamestown, and this is one of the hard parts about the church, even though they won on the church closures, the bishop is the one who gets to say how many times a year the church can be open for worship. And the whole, vibe had deteriorated. The relationship had, for a long, sad saga, you can read about it in the book, of betrayal really on the part of the diocese. That even though they love their church, they, maybe only once or twice a year can they do that. So it's sort of a mixed bag. And I would say in Cleveland, and again, you can read about it in the book, but the St. Peter community basically said to the bishop, you can have our church, but you can't have our community. And they ended up moving into a big former automobile sales facility down the road and redid it beautifully. And they're still they're called a breakaway community, but I always say they didn't leave the church left them. So thankfully that doesn't usually happen. What happens is people just quietly go away and don't go anywhere anymore, because people do bond with their faith community. And that's what I think the bishops don't get. They don't get how important that those years of relationships and baptisms and sacraments, they don't understand how important that is. It is a living organism. It's not just, some business that, you can shut down. So I'm trying to think of some other examples, but those are the ones that come to mind. Well, thank you for the question. We've had as much fun as we can stand for one afternoon, right? Oh, there's Simone. Oh, so I guess we do.
Okay. Hi, I'm Ann Camisa. I also teach at Georgetown in the government department. And I have just a really basic question, but so they're using these church closures to try and get finances to pay for the clergy sex abuse scandal. So if they don't have that resource, what can they go to pay for it?
Bankruptcy. I'm sorry, it's sad to say. And, there's a lot more to that question that I was not able to get to, because there was a whole saga, because after Boston, and quite up front, some of the dream parishes you never want to close. And it wasn't until 4 years later that they found out that, yes, in fact, they had been. And then the clergy, dicastery clergy, told them you cannot use money, you cannot close churches, sell it, and do. So what they changed it to, that's when they went to mergers. And again, the dynamic of closing a poor parish that had back due assessments to the diocese with a well-run parish, then the diocese would get the back due assessments from the merger because the assets and liabilities were all one. So that was one workaround. But now, and I think the other thing with the mergers, you merge like 3 or 4 places together with 4 sites, and suddenly you've got one parish financial council that's responsible for all the real estate. And it's attrition. They're hoping by a certain period of time that those sales will happen. And, I'm sorry, but in Rockville Center, I just found this out. Every parish was assessed a certain amount of money to pay for the clergy sex abuse attorney fees. So it's a mess, quite honestly. And Kate always said, if only the bishops would just be up front, she felt sure people would come, but to try to, go about it by destroying the stuff they held most dear, not a way to go. I think Simone had something. My shiro. Here's another shiro of mine.
Even though 80% of the room
Thank
knows
you.
who you are, still do the introduction because the live streamers do. We want to.
Okay, I'm Simone Campbell. I'm a sister of social service and got some notoriety from Nuns on the Bus and
Right.
a few other things.
And the Nunquisition.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there was that. Chris, I'm really grateful that you wrote the book about history and about change and the possibility of shaking loose something in Rome or even something in our diocese. And I'm curious if you've thought in this interim moment that we're in as a church, as we wait for new news for white smoke, and I think of you, do you all know that she was in the square when Francis was elected, and it's memorialized in the movie Amazing Grace.
Radical
Radical Grace.
In the movie too.
I'm in that movie too, but the best part was
We had fun.
being there. But I'm wondering, do you have a vision of what you hope, who you hope will read the book and engage it? Who do we need to get this to? I'm thinking strategically. Where does it go? Who do we get it to? How does NCR promote it? Whose hands does it need to be in to really make change? That's from the heart, not just from the dollar signs. Because I think that's at the heart of this. Do we care for each other?
I love the question. I have to be honest. I was just so grateful to have it written and out there, and Carole really helped make it happen. I mean, who wants to read a book about canon law? But my friend, classmate Julie loved it. And she said it was like reading an adventure. I think it's a great organizing question. I think it's important. The canon lawyers would help if they read the book. Certainly would help if bishops read the book. If we read, even if I have a friend who was actually just named a bishop. I won't name who he is, but he's a wonderful man. So I'm sending him the book. But, I'm not going to try to figure out like who's going to be the next pope. I just hope it's someone who has experience with ordinary Catholics, in low-income situations. I'm going to even go that far because I think that's part of how Francis became Francis, was because he saw the Spirit at work in all the barrios in Argentina, And so I think if you have someone who has that experience, who understands how important these communities are for anchoring whole neighborhoods, you have a whole other approach to it. And quite honestly, I mean, certainly Future Church, we should be opening ordination. I mean, it's not rocket science. We need both. We need celibate vocations. We need married vocations. We need women. We need men. But I mean, I don't know, the Spirit. Of course, she does her best work in chaos. So here we are.